I was cleaning out the attic on a quiet Sunday afternoon, sifting through boxes of forgotten holiday decorations and dusty books, when I came across an old leather-bound photo album tucked beneath a yellowed quilt. Its cover was cracked with age, and the corners had curled inward as if it had been waiting to be found after decades of silence. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, brushing off the dust, and carefully opened it. Page after page revealed black and white photographs, smiling faces frozen in time, sepia-toned memories of birthdays, weddings, and everyday moments that felt oddly intimate yet unfamiliar. I recognized my grandparents in their youth, and a much younger version of my father standing beside people I could not name. Then I turned a page and stopped. One photograph in particular made my breath catch in my throat. It was a group shot, taken in what looked like a sun-drenched garden, full of flowers and laughter. My father stood at the center, holding hands with a woman I had never seen before. She looked eerily familiar, her eyes mirrored mine, her smile felt unsettlingly close, but no name was written beneath the image. Everyone else in the photo was smiling, except for one figure at the edge of the frame, who appeared to be walking away, almost blurred as if in motion. I had never seen this photograph, and no one had ever mentioned that day. Something about it felt wrong, like a memory that had been intentionally hidden away. As I stared at it longer, a cold unease began to spread through me. What if everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie? The leather on the cover creaked as I flipped through the old album again, this time more slowly, more intentionally. The pages were thick and worn, some stained with time, others curling at the edges. Faded ink in delicate cursive marked the corners of many photographs, names, dates, and occasional notes that read like tiny whispers from the past. Summer 1964, Lakeview. One caption read beneath an image of three people sitting on a checkered blanket by a lake. I recognized none of them. Another photo said, Harold's graduation, 1959. There was no Harold in our immediate family, at least not one I had ever heard about. Some of the pictures were clearly older than others, with people dressed in fashions long out of style, women in tea-length dresses and men in wide-lapelled suits. The settings varied too, some suburban, others rural, and a few that looked almost foreign, though none were labeled as such. I leaned closer to one photo, squinting at a familiar chin and brow line on a young man with a confident smile. It looked like my father, but younger than I had ever seen him, standing beside a group of people I could not identify. As I kept flipping, I began to notice that some individuals appeared repeatedly, always in the background, never named. One woman in particular caught my attention. She appeared in at least 3 different photographs, always on the edge of the frame. Her face bore an uncanny resemblance to mine, so much so that I felt a jolt of unease ripple through me. In one picture, she was holding a baby wrapped in a floral blanket. That photo was dated 1975, 10 years before I was born. I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting below simply said, June, new arrival. There was no name, no location. My mind tried to piece it together logically. Who was this woman? Why did she look so much like me? Who was the baby she was holding? The questions began to layer on top of each other, forming a weight that settled in my chest. Why had no one ever mentioned her? As I kept going through the album, I noticed other strange details. Certain people were labeled in earlier photographs but were not mentioned in later ones. Some family gatherings seemed to take place in the same location, with different people, as if scenes were being repeated but with new casts. One beach trip had 2 versions, same date written below, same boardwalk, same chairs, but different people. How could that be? I took the album downstairs and placed it gently on the kitchen table. My mother was sipping tea and flipping through a magazine. I asked her if she recognized the woman in the photo, the one holding the baby. Her smile faltered, and she took the album with a stiffness that did not match the casual mood of the afternoon. She looked at the image and said nothing for a moment too long. That was someone from your father's side, she said eventually, her voice carefully neutral. An old friend of the family. She looks just like me, I said quietly. My mother glanced at me and nodded, forcing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Coincidence, I suppose. I watched her closely. And the baby. Who was the baby? I really do not know, she said quickly, closing the album and pushing it slightly away from herself. These old photos, they bring up a lot of memories. Not all of them are happy ones. She left the kitchen soon after that, her teacup still half full. I stared at the closed album, unsettled by the way her tone had shifted. It was not just avoidance, it was discomfort, perhaps even fear. There was something hidden in those pages, something no one wanted to talk about. Later that night, I went back to the album. I needed to see the woman's face again, to remind myself I was not imagining the resemblance. As I turned the pages, retracing the ones I had seen before, I realized something was missing. Between 2 events labeled Christmas 1981 and Spring Picnic 1982, there was a gap. The page had been ripped cleanly out, leaving only the jagged remnants near the binding. The torn edge was recent, the fibers still pale and sharp compared to the yellowed borders around it. My heart pounded in my ears. Why would someone remove just that one page? What had it shown? Who had taken it, and when? I reached the end of the album, hoping perhaps the missing photo had been moved elsewhere, but there was nothing. Just the final few images, growing increasingly sparse, as if someone had lost interest in documenting the rest. The silence of the attic returned in my ears. The shadows cast by the lamp seemed longer now, darker. I sat back, staring at the album with new eyes. Someone had wanted me to forget something, someone had hoped I would never find it. But now I had seen too much. The ripped page was not just a gap in paper, it was a doorway. I could not turn back. I needed to know what had been hidden from me. I spent the next morning unable to think of anything else. The missing page in the album had opened a door in my mind that would not close. I needed answers. I needed to understand who that woman was, why she looked like me, and what had been torn from the record of our family history. I decided to start at the public library. It was the kind of quiet place where people rarely asked questions, where time moved slowly, and old truths had a way of surfacing if one knew where to look. The library held decades of town records, newspapers, school yearbooks, and census lists. I gave the woman at the front desk a name I had seen in the album, Harold, the boy graduating in 1959. She showed me to the archives. I pored over microfilm reels, blinking at the flickering screen, scrolling through announcements of marriages, births, obituaries. In a 1960 edition of the local newspaper, I found a graduation article that listed Harold's full name, Harold James Whitmore. I kept scanning, and a few pages later, I saw an engagement notice. It mentioned a woman named Lydia Reynolds. I went back to the album in my mind, trying to connect the names to the faces. The names did not appear beneath any of the photos. Were they connected to the people in the unlabeled images? Were they part of the group that seemed to vanish after a certain point in time? Later that afternoon, I visited my great-aunt Margaret, who was in her 80s and still lived in the same house she had grown up in. She was one of the few living relatives who might have seen the truth firsthand. She welcomed me warmly, but her eyes narrowed slightly when I mentioned the photo album. I found some pictures while cleaning the attic, I said. There were a lot of faces I did not recognize. That old album, she replied, pouring tea into a delicate cup. I thought that had been lost years ago. I nodded. There was a woman who looked a lot like me. She was in several photos from the 70s. Do you remember anyone like that? Margaret paused, her hand shaking slightly as she set the cup down. You are probably thinking of Rose. The name settled in my chest like a stone. I had never heard it mentioned before. Who was Rose? She seemed to struggle with the decision to continue. She was your father's sister. My heart skipped. My father had a sister? Margaret nodded slowly. He did. Rose was special. She was full of life. But there were troubles. Your grandparents were proud people. When things started to fall apart, they made choices. What kind of choices? I asked, leaning forward. She gave me a look full of sorrow. Rose had a child when she was very young. Too young, really. Your grandfather was furious. He said it would shame the family. There were arguments. Then one day, she was just gone. Sent away. Your father never spoke of her again. A cold wave passed through me. I thought of the woman in the photo, the one who looked so much like me. The baby in her arms. The date below it. 1975. Where was she sent? I asked. I do not know, Margaret said. They never told me. All I know is that she never came back. And your grandparents burned most of her things. They wanted her gone. I left Margaret's house with the name Rose echoing in my mind. That night, I pulled out the album again and studied the photo dated June 1975. The woman, Rose, I now believed, looked serene but distant, as though she had already begun to disappear. The baby in her arms was wrapped tight, its face barely visible. I traced the outline with my fingertip. The next day, I returned to the library and searched for Rose Whitmore in the local records. I found only one mention. A birth certificate for Rose Evelyn Whitmore, born 1957. After that, the trail went cold. No school records. No marriage license. No death notice. It was as though she had vanished. Then I remembered the torn page. If someone had taken that page from the album, perhaps they had done so to hide something even more concrete, like a name. A name that would confirm everything Margaret had just told me. I dug through my parents' storage closet that evening, hoping to find any documents that might have escaped destruction. Old envelopes, medical records, anything. In a box marked taxes and personal, beneath yellowed receipts and expired passports, I found a small manila envelope with no writing on it. Inside was a folded birth certificate. The paper was old but preserved, official and unaltered. It was not mine. Name, Evelyn Grace. Date of birth, June 3, 1975. Mother, Rose Evelyn Whitmore. Father, unknown. I sat down slowly, unable to take my eyes off the page. Evelyn. That was my middle name. I had always thought it was chosen simply because it sounded elegant. I had never questioned it. My hands trembled as I read the name again. This document did not list my father. It did not list the people who had raised me. But it listed Rose. Rose, the woman who had disappeared. Rose, the woman who looked like me. This was not just a coincidence. This was a truth that had been hidden from me for my entire life. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. All the unanswered questions, the strange photographs, the missing names, they all pointed here. I had found the edge of the truth. And now that I had a name, I could go further. I could find her. Or, at the very least, find out what had happened to her after that summer in 1975. As I sat there in the dim light, the envelope still in my lap, I heard the mail slot click open. I walked to the door and found a small letter on the floor addressed to me. There was no return address. Just my name in unfamiliar handwriting. My fingers felt heavy as I opened it and began to read. The first line was short and simple. You are not who you think you are. I waited 2 days before I could bring myself to face my mother. 2 days of holding that letter in my hands, reading the words over and over again. You are not who you think you are. I memorized the shape of every letter, the curve of the handwriting. The envelope had no return address, but the message was clear. Somebody out there knew. And they had decided it was time for me to know too. When I walked into my parents' house, I felt like an intruder. Every picture on the wall, every familiar scent, every soft memory now felt altered, like it was draped in something artificial. My mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred something on the stove. I stood behind her for a moment longer than I should have, trying to decide how to begin. "I need to talk to you," I said. She turned slowly, sensing something in my voice. "What is it?" I took the envelope from my pocket and handed it to her. She looked at it for only a second before her face changed. Her mouth pressed into a hard line. Her eyes, wide and dark, searched mine for understanding, for accusation, for mercy. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "It came in the mail," I said. "But I already knew. I found the birth certificate. I talked to Aunt Margaret. I saw the photo. Her name was Rose." My mother sat down. Her hands trembled as she laid the envelope on the table between us. I could see her entire body tighten, the way a person prepares for an impact. I waited. The silence pressed in around us, heavy and patient. "She was my sister," I said. "Was she my mother?" Her shoulders fell. "Yes." I had prepared myself for this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud was like the ground slipping beneath my feet. I sat across from her, holding onto the edge of the table. "Why did you never tell me?" I whispered. She looked at me then, tears already gathering in her eyes. "Because it was never supposed to be like this. Because we were trying to protect you. Because it was not my choice alone." I said nothing. My heart was beating so loudly I could barely hear the rest of the world. My mother closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Rose was 16. She had just started her junior year when she met someone. He was older, from out of town, visiting relatives. They spent the whole summer together. She was different after that. Quieter. I knew something was wrong. One morning she came to me in tears and said she thought she was pregnant. We told our parents, and everything fell apart. "What happened to him?" I asked. "He disappeared. Vanished. We tried to contact him, but nobody would help." Rose refused to say much about him. She said she loved him, that he had promised to come back. But he never did. And then, our father was furious. Said she had ruined the family. Back then, people did not talk about these things. They sent her away to live with a distant cousin in another state. They told the neighbors she had gone to a special school for girls. "She gave birth to you there, in a little hospital by the highway." I stared at her. My chest felt hollow. "I went to visit her. I held you. You were so small, so quiet. Rose wanted to keep you. She begged our parents. But they refused. They said the shame would follow us forever. They made arrangements. They were going to put you up for adoption. But I could not let that happen." She wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "I was married to your father then. We had not been able to have children of our own. I told them we would take you. I told Rose it was the only way she could still be a part of your life. She cried when she handed you to me. But she kissed your forehead and said she would always love you." I sat motionless, trying to reconcile everything I had believed with what I was hearing now. "She wrote letters," I said. "Did you keep them?" My mother nodded. "She wrote often at first. But the letters came less and less. Then they stopped. The last one came when you were about 6. She said she had met someone and was going away. She did not say where. We never heard from her again." I looked down at my hands, wondering how many birthdays she had missed, how many milestones she had imagined from afar. My real mother. My aunt. The woman in the photograph. "Why did you not tell me when I was older?" "We thought about it," she said. "But what would it have changed? You were happy. You had a family. We did not want to break that. And we were afraid. Afraid you would hate us, or that you would go searching and find something painful." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I have loved you as my own every single day. You are my daughter in every way that matters." I believed her. I could see it in her face, the anguish and the love tangled together. But that did not make the questions disappear. It did not erase the emptiness that came from not knowing who I truly was for all these years. "I just wanted the truth," I said softly. She nodded. "I know. And I am sorry we waited so long." There was a long silence between us. The weight of generations seemed to hang in the air. "She loved you," my mother said suddenly. "Rose. I know she did. That is why she let you go." I closed my eyes. For a moment I could see her clearly, the young girl in the photo, holding her baby with a look of quiet heartbreak. Not fear, not shame, but sacrifice. When I returned home that evening, I opened the album again. The photos looked different now. The woman with my face was no longer a mystery. She was my mother. The man beside her was a stranger, but perhaps he was the boy who had vanished. The baby was me. I ran my fingers over the spot where the page had been ripped away. I still did not know who had sent the letter or why they had chosen now, after all this time. But the silence was broken. The story was no longer buried beneath shame and secrecy. The old album no longer felt like a collection of forgotten moments. It felt like a map. A starting point. A path back to someone who had given up everything in the hope that one day, I might find her again. The morning air was sharp and still as I stood outside the small town hall, the worn bricks and faded paint whispering stories of decades past. I had traveled nearly 3 hours to reach this place, following only a name scribbled on the back of a photograph and the last known address of someone who might hold the missing pieces. My mother's truth had opened the door, but the shadows inside it were far from still. There was another face, another name, and another silence that stretched back just as far. I had spent nights sorting through the old photos, holding each one beneath a lamp like it might speak if I stared long enough. There was one image that refused to leave my mind. A man with dark eyes and the same crooked smile that stared back at me in the mirror. His arm was around Rose, and something about the way they leaned into each other told me they were more than friends. The handwriting on the back said only one word: David. The town clerk was kind but curious. She handed me a thin stack of archived documents. I sifted through them at a desk in the corner, the light humming overhead. After nearly an hour, I found it. A marriage license from 1988. Rose and David. Then a birth certificate for a boy named Adam. I froze. My heart beat against my ribs as I traced the name over and over with my eyes. There was an address, though it was old. I copied it and left. The house was not far. A small gray structure tucked behind overgrown hedges and a crumbling fence. I stood at the gate for a long time, unsure whether to knock or walk away. Then the door opened. A man, maybe in his 30s, stood there, holding a basket of laundry. His eyes locked with mine. "Can I help you?" he asked. I stepped forward. "Are you Adam?" He nodded slowly. "My name is—" I paused, trying to find the right word. "I think we are related." His face shifted, suspicion and confusion flickering across his expression. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photo of Rose and David. I handed it to him. "This is your mother, right?" I asked. He stared at the photo for a long time, and then he nodded. "Yes, that is them. I think Rose was my mother too." He blinked, and then looked up at me again. "Come in." The house was quiet. It smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. A dog barked in the distance. Adam led me to a small living room. There was a photo on the mantel. Rose, a little older than I had ever seen her, holding a baby. "She died when I was 10, he said softly. "Car accident." I sat down slowly. The loss was sudden, cold. I had imagined her somewhere out there, alive but distant, maybe waiting. I had never imagined she was already gone. "I never knew she had another child," Adam said. "I did not know she was my mother until a few weeks ago," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "She never talked much about the past. I asked once about family, and she said she had a sister. That was it." We sat in silence, the weight of years pressing down between us. "Do you know what happened with her and David?" I asked. He shook his head. "He left when I was little. She said he had his reasons." That was all she would ever say. "I think he was the father of both of us," I said, and my voice trembled a little. Adam looked at the photo again. "Do you want to see something?" He led me down a narrow hallway to a small bedroom. The bed was neatly made. The room had not changed in years. In the closet, tucked high on a shelf, was a box. He pulled it down carefully and opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, and a journal. "She kept this," he said. "I have not read all of it." I opened the journal with care. The handwriting matched the letter I had received. It was Rose. Her words spilled across the pages, pages filled with longing, guilt, and dreams that had faded away. She wrote about me. She wrote about the day she handed me to her sister. She wrote about hearing my voice on the phone when I was 2 and crying after hanging up. She wrote about watching from a distance, afraid to interfere, believing she had done the right thing, and hoping I would be loved. She wrote about Adam, about the joy he brought her, the pain of losing David, and her fear that her past would always haunt her children. I closed the journal and held it to my chest. "She wanted us to know each other," I said quietly. Adam nodded. "Looks like she did." We sat there for a long time, 2 lives connected by a silence neither of us had chosen. I felt grief, but also gratitude. The years lost could never be returned, but the wall that had separated our lives was now gone. I spent the next few days in that town. Adam and I talked about everything. Childhood stories, memories of Rose, questions we both had carried. I visited her grave, a quiet spot under a birch tree in a small cemetery. I brought her flowers, knelt by her stone, and told her everything I wished I could have said before. Forgiveness came slowly. Not just for her, but for everyone. For my mother who had raised me in love and silence. For the family who had hidden the truth out of fear. For myself, for not knowing sooner. When I returned home, I brought with me a box of memories. Photos of Rose I had never seen. Letters written in her voice. A lock of hair. A tiny pair of baby shoes she had kept all those years. I laid everything out on my table, next to the album I had found in the attic. I began to arrange them into 2 books. One was the old album, now restored, pages reattached, the missing photographs placed gently where they belonged. The other was new, a record of what had come after, of what had been hidden and now found. I wrote captions beneath the photos. I added dates, names, and stories. As I turned the pages, I saw not just one life, but 2. One that was lived in the open, the birthdays, the holidays, the moments captured by a smiling lens. And one that had lived in silence, in letters unsent, in rooms untouched, in memories carefully stored away. But now, both albums were whole. 2 parallel lives, no longer erased. I closed them slowly and placed them side by side on my shelf. The past had not changed. But I had. The light in the attic was softer now. It filtered through the small window in a way that made the dust shimmer like tiny stars suspended in stillness. I stood where it had all begun, the old wooden boards creaking beneath my feet, the familiar scent of aged paper and forgotten seasons curling around me like an embrace. In my hands was the album, no longer torn, no longer incomplete. It looked different now. Not because the pictures had changed, but because I had. Each photograph was no longer just an image. It was a story. Some were joyful, some were heavy with sorrow, and some still carried questions that might never find answers. But they all meant something now. Each face had a name. Each silence had a sound behind it. The pages no longer felt like riddles. They felt like history. I had written notes in the margins. I had added small cards between the pages, listing names, places, years. Next to the image of Rose and David, I had included a short paragraph in my own handwriting. I wrote what I knew. I wrote what I had felt. And in doing so, I had claimed the story not as a mystery but as a piece of truth that belonged to all of us. In the weeks that followed my visit to Adam, I had reached out to other members of the family. Some had known small fragments of the truth, but had never felt it was theirs to share. Others were shocked. A few had wept quietly and said they always wondered why certain names were never mentioned, why certain days were not celebrated, why some people disappeared without explanation. Silence had done its work over the years, wrapping itself around their hearts and teaching them that forgetting might be easier than confronting. But forgetting had not protected anyone. It had only made the pain echo longer. We decided to gather, those of us who carried pieces of the story. In a sunlit backyard filled with folding chairs and plates of food, we met. There were old relatives, young cousins, second and third branches of the family tree who had never shared a meal before. Adam came, bringing a few of Rose's photos that I had not seen. My mother was there too, quiet but open, her hand in mine most of the day. She had told me everything she could remember, everything she had tried for so long to keep tucked away. That day, she allowed herself to listen as others filled in the parts she had not known or had chosen to forget. No one raised their voice. No one cast blame. We spoke in circles of memory, passing stories from one voice to another like fragile glass. I watched my family rebuild something with words, something that had cracked long ago. We did not hide the truth. We named it. We said it out loud so it would not be forgotten again. At the center of the gathering was the album. I had placed it on a small table where everyone could see. People turned the pages slowly, pausing at certain faces, sharing what they remembered or what they had wondered. I saw tears fall. I heard laughter, the kind that comes when a burden begins to lift. I saw someone place a flower beside the page that held Rose's picture. No one asked who she was anymore. They knew. When the sun began to set and people started to leave, I stood for a moment beside the album. Someone had left a note tucked into its back cover. It said only, "Thank you for listening." That night, I sat in my room, staring at the empty notebook beside me. I opened it and began to write, not just for myself, but for whoever would come after me. I began to tell the story from the beginning, the attic, the album, the questions, the truths. I wrote it all, even the parts that still stung. I did not know how far the story would go, or how many pages it would take, but I knew it had to be written. Not to preserve pain, but to protect understanding. Silence had shaped too much already. It was time for clarity. Photographs can hold the curve of a smile, the glance between two people, the color of a dress, the backdrop of a season. But they cannot hold the words left unsaid. They cannot explain why someone disappeared, or why someone was never named. They cannot reveal the weight of a decision made in the quiet of the night, or the ache of love that could not be spoken. That is the work of memory. That is the work of courage. As I finished another page in my notebook, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The fear I had carried, the fear of what I might find, of what it would mean, was no longer with me. I had found more than answers. I had found the people behind the questions. I had found a connection that reached beyond time and silence. And in doing so, I had helped restore something that had always belonged to us. I returned to the attic one last time before sealing the album in a protective box. It would not be forgotten again. I placed it gently on a shelf with the new one beside it. 2 volumes, 2 voices, 2 truths, both part of the same legacy. As I looked around the attic, I no longer saw a place of hidden things. I saw a room full of stories waiting to be heard. I smiled, then turned back toward the stairs. Behind me, the albums waited, not as mysteries, but as gifts.